and we're also going to start the recording. So hello, Stephanie, and hello, Lecia.
Hi.
How are you both?
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having us.
Yay. Lecia, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling from Alberta, Canada. Hello,
Okay.
San Diego.
Hello, San Diego, a few thousand miles away. But Stephanie, I think you might be even further away. Where are you calling in from?
Yeah, we would have to do like a little Google map comparison, but I'm calling from Alaska. So
okay. Yeah.
Very, very jealous of those of you who are not sitting in snow right now.
But there's some people that might be here from like the hot zones that are like, oh, we're in a drought. That's why my husband and I was talking about. It's like if we could just import some of that water and snow to some of these areas.
We would all be happy.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, welcome to Virtual Warwick. So thank you both for being here. I'm going to do a couple quick housekeeping things before we get started. So just real quick, so Stephanie's Alaska, Lecia's in Canada, Warwick's is located in San Diego, in case you're joining from those locations or somewhere in between. We're located kind of at the tip of the United States, down at the bottom corner there. We're located in San Diego. Warwick's is in La Jolla. It's a little village right above San Diego in California. And my little sign there says 1896. And so we are celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. So we're not the oldest bookstore. Thank you. We're not the oldest bookstore in the country, but oldest continuously family owned. And we're saying this in an earlier thing today that we've survived 2 pandemics, a couple world wars. So we've been around for a while. So with that, in the chat, I'm going to put both Stephanie and Lecia's books into the chat comment section of Facebook. Easy to click on that. We can ship anywhere in the United States, and there is a little bit of a premium to get things up into Canada, but we can do that too. Just put a note in there. If you're in the San Diego area, we would love for you to stop by the store. Nancy's got a wonderful other side of the store is full of wonderful gifts and jewelry and fine pens. So it's a great place to shop on top of all the wonderful books that we have. So there's that. And in that comment section, we'd love to hear from you. We love having audience questions. So Stephanie and Lecia are going to talk for about 30-ish minutes with each other. And then we'll all come back on screen and bring in some questions that you might have. So with that, I'm going to do my intros of these 2 lovely ladies and then pop off the screen. Lecia Cornwell, acclaimed author of numerous historical romance novels, lives and writes in the beautiful foothills of the Canadian Rockies with 4 cats and a wild and crazy 90-pound chocolate lab named Andy. I love that. She has 2 grown children and 1 very patient husband. We love the patient husbands. When she's not writing, Lecia is a dedicated volunteer at the Museum of the Highland in High River, Alberta. The Woman at the Front is her first novel of historical women's fiction. And Stephanie Marie Thornton is a USA Today bestselling author and high school history teacher. She lives in Alaska with her, like we said earlier, with her husband and daughter. Take it away, ladies. Stephanie, I think you were going to start first and tell us a little bit about your new book. And I'll see you all in about a half hour.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julie. So I am here today to talk about A Most Clever Girl, and I'm super excited to be here with Lecia because her book, The Woman at the Front, was just a fabulous read. I was privileged enough to read it a little bit before it came out. So about A Most Clever Girl, this is the story of Elizabeth Bentley, who is a very little known historical figure. I had to do some serious digging to find her. And she was a spy, but she spied on America, even though she was this nice girl from Connecticut during World War II. And then as soon as our alliance with Russia deteriorated immediately after World War II, she turned her coat, went to the FBI, and informed on her entire spy network, which had actually become the largest world spy network in America, Soviet spy network. So she is credited by some folks with single-handedly collapsing the golden era of Soviet espionage in America. So that is A Most Clever Girl. So Lecia, do you want to give us the elevator pitch on The Woman at the Front?
Sure. The Woman at the Front came out yesterday, and it is the story of a female British doctor in World War I. And the British did not allow women doctors to practice on the Western Front. And my heroine finds a way to go over and make a difference and find a way to help the wounded, and in the process has an adventure and finds herself, among other things. So that's basically what the story's about.
So I love romance novels and also historical fiction. And I've never written a romance novel. I probably never will, but I've noticed this super fun trend that a lot of my favorite authors, yourself included, and like Chanel Clayton and Stephanie Dre and Laura Camoy, I found them by a historical fiction and then went, oh, and they also wrote romance. So can you tell us like what kind of things, like tools in your toolbox, have helped you like cross the bridge from romance to historical fiction?
Okay. I find that it's quite common for historical romance or romance novelists to switch. And I remember hearing one of them say, yeah, I got to the point where I would rather kill them than kiss them. So they either move to suspense or they move to women's fiction. The reason why I moved was after a number of books, I had a contract canceled in the middle, and my agent gently said, "You've been talking about writing a World War I story. Now's the time to make that shift." So she was very encouraging and sort of pushed me in that direction. And when the editor, the publisher bought the book, they suggested that because I had a strong romance background, that they wanted that element of a love story in The Woman at the Front. So yes, it was a lot of fun to try and squeeze a romance into a time that was not romantic and a place that was anything but romantic. But yes, we managed to do that. So
I loved it because, World War I is like mud and trenches and death, and that little bit of romance is also a glimmer of hope. So it kept me cheering and turning the pages really fast too. With Eleanor, the main character in your book, she, of course, goes to the front, hence the title, and is a female doctor. And that was pretty revolutionary for the time period. So my books, I always try to find women who've been forgotten. And in the case of like Elizabeth Bentley, she was forgotten and also vilified. So do you feel like through your research and through writing this, that women who have broken into historically male professions are often ignored and vilified? And if so, like why? Why does this always happen to women?
I don't know. I know that was the case with Elizabeth Bentley. That you've mentioned in other interviews that she didn't get the credit that other male spies got for doing exactly the same thing, and she was sort of the scapegoat for everything. Now, World War I mean, a lot of women doctors sort of went out, raised the funds as soon as the war began, supplied their own hospitals, went to the British government, said, here you go. Here's a hospital ready to be deployed, staffed by very qualified women. And they were famously told, go home and sit down. So they trotted across the street to the French embassy instead and said, would you like our services? And that's what they did. But there were so many women who did amazing things in medicine and science and a whole lot of other things during the war. And while they were recognized by the Belgian government, the French government, and given medals, the British didn't do that. So they just ignored them, which was very sad. I mean, some of them were invited back home to form their own hospitals, but those closed, and a lot of the opportunities that they were given during the war were taken away again. So it's very sad.
Yeah, it really is. So I don't know. I'm a history teacher. I just assumed that there were women doctors on the front with World War I because there were a lot of women nurses and ambulance drivers and things like that. So I learned from your book that no, in fact, that was not the case. This was pretty groundbreaking. So as a historical author, we tend to learn a lot over the course of not just reading other books, but writing our own. So what were some of the craziest, most surprising things that jumped out at you when you were doing your research, and were you able to incorporate them in the book also?
Some of them I was, but the thing that amazed me most was all the innovations that were actually came about by women. Female nurses, they discovered the best way to treat shock. There was a female engineer. She wasn't even allowed to join her professional organization in Britain, but she invented this pump that cleared the trenches of gas, and it was used throughout the war. And it was one of the most successful pieces of kit that they had. And I bet nobody out there has heard of Hertha Ayrton. So, but I mean, this thing was absolutely groundbreaking. So that was very surprising. And that the hospitals that were run by the women were, they had lower casualty rates than any of the other hospitals. And some of the things that the treatments that they developed, like colorful wards and flowers and music and diversions are still used in hospitals now because they developed them. So yes, women were very, very important. So
women are really important to the war. And then, one of the things that I teach when I'm teaching World War I is that the war also provided an opportunity for women because, of course, the suffrage movements come about. They had started, but then hit the pause button. And then when women come back, or not, well, some of the women come back, but also the women who were at home are like, and now it's time for you to give us the vote. So the war provides some opportunities there as well. So do you think that the war provides a catalyst for women like Eleanor, other women in real life who are trying to step outside society's kind of narrow and accepted gender roles at the time?
It did initially. I mean, during the war, women went to work in munitions factories. They were policemen, firemen, nurses, volunteers, ambulance drivers, and they stepped up and took the place of men who were at the front. And they had all these opportunities at medical schools opened to them for the first time. But then when the war ended, they stopped being accepted at medical schools and they were expected to give up their job. And the government started this program of classes for women to teach them how to be the perfect wives and mothers and homemakers. But the problem with that was there was a shortage of men. So a lot of these women never got the chance to marry at all. So yes, and when they were given the vote in 1918 in Britain, only women over 30 who own property got that privilege. So it was good. It was a start, but not nearly enough. Yeah, especially with what they did. So yeah, I'm not sure when suffrage came about in the U.S., but I'm sure it was probably a similar thing where not every woman could vote. But
a couple of years later, the states had been starting a few of them to work in that direction, but it
yes,
takes time, and the women's rights movement continues. It's not just the right to vote, so on.
Yep.
Well, I totally loved it. So everybody who's watching, the woman at the front is riveting. So definitely go nab a copy, put your order in at Warwick's because you can thank me later. We'll just put it that way.
Well, excellent. And I wanted to ask you some things about your book. I was absolutely delighted to get a chance to read it. And I remember reading the first few paragraphs and just like, oh, this is exceptional. I love this. And some of the things I love best, I love the lipstick that she always wears as her sort of symbol. So I wore red lipstick, which I never do. It's not necessary to wear lipstick with masks these days, so this is kind of nice. So, but people always ask us as writers where we get our ideas from. And I think a better question would be, how do you choose from all the ideas that come into your mind? And you have written about some of history's most fascinating women. Now, what was it about Elizabeth Bentley that made you choose her as wanted to tell her story?
Well, Elizabeth was my writing project after, and they called it Camelot, which is Jackie Kennedy's story. So I
I
went
love that book.
icon to someone that I rarely come across anybody who's like, oh, Elizabeth Bentley, yeah, I know her. And I didn't know Elizabeth Bentley. So most of my stories have come to me like through teaching resources where I'll catch a name and there'll be like a little sentence or something. And I go, oh, there has to be more to that story. And honestly, after Jackie Kennedy, whose story I loved writing, but it was very much like must fact check everything. What was Jackie Kennedy's lipstick color that day? What shoes did she wear? Like everything is documented. I was looking for somebody more obscure. And the Cold War is a really intriguing time period. So I thought, the Cold War is full of spies and espionage, and there must be some female spies during the Cold War that we just don't know about. So I literally just did a Google search and Elizabeth Bentley's name came up. And as I started reading, there's that aha moment. I'm like, why haven't I heard of this woman? So that was her. She was like Joseph McCarthy, but I'm not a fan of McCarthy. Let's put that out there. He was full of hot air. Didn't know what he was talking about when he said, I have a list of all the communist spies in the US government. Elizabeth Bentley said the same thing, but she literally knew all of the spies because they were her contacts. So the fact that she goes to the FBI and informed on them, and then her story gets completely forgotten. She was vilified at the time because nobody thought that she was telling the truth. And part of that also, her testimony helps lead to the conviction of the Rosenbergs for leaking the atomic secrets to the Russians, which we found out, we knew at the time, but it's since been declassified that they were definitely guilty. Elizabeth was telling the truth, but she's vilified during her lifetime and then forgotten after she passes away. And I thought, there's a story there that needs told.
Absolutely. And you tell it very, very well. It's an absolutely fascinating read.
Well, thank you.
When you were, Elizabeth was, during reading the book, it's like, okay, she lies a lot and she has a lot of unpleasantness about her. Did your opinion of her change from the time you sort of discovered her and started writing to the end of the book? Like, did you actually find that you liked Elizabeth Bentley as a person? Or
So she was a very fun character to write. Because my hope is that she keeps readers on her toes. When I first started researching Elizabeth, I was kind of indignant, like, how can we not know this woman's story? And then as I did more research, I found that the core key elements that she told on the stand and to the FBI were true. There's a top secret project that was declassified in the 90s, Project Venona, that the FBI had decrypted Russian cables. So they were able to corroborate what she had been saying. But they put a lot of pressure on her to perform because she was like their star witness during the Red Scare. And they said, we know you're telling the truth. We know these people are spies, but we need you to perform, essentially. And she started elaborating and definitely straying into the gray zone. So there were times when I definitely wanted to either throttle her or like look her in the nose. But that also made for a really fun writing experience.
yes,
She is an unreliable narrator, and is what she's saying the truth? Is it not? And that's also why there's a second narrator in there. So Kat Gray is able to say, no, Elizabeth, that's not how it happened, and help give the reader like, okay, here's what really happened. And then Elizabeth will own up to it. All right, fine. So yeah, she's definitely different than any of my other protagonists I've written.
well, I love dark characters like that. I remember reading, I think it was The Red Queen by Philippa Gregory, and Margaret of Beaufort was a horrible person. She was selfish and she was grasping and a whole lot of other things. And yet her book was so fascinating. And when I read yours, I thought, wow, you've taken a character who people don't know about and who may not necessarily be super heroic, but and yet made her absolutely fascinating. which is just
a
wonderful.
logical portrait. Really have to get inside her head.
Yes. What facets of her personality do you think truly made her a clever girl? Was it the fact that she was able to lie so easily, or was it something else about her?
I think that Elizabeth was a really good study of people, and
Mhm.
I would make a horrific spy. Like I would say, but I feel like spies have to be really good at reading people.
Mhm.
And Elizabeth, I felt for her because she's extremely well educated. She had multiple master's degrees, but she didn't have friends. She just didn't. There was a line in one of the memoirs about her where her classmates in college called her a sad sack. And I just thought, if a woman can make it through to her mid 20s and has no friends, my guess is she's been the wallflower and has really studied people a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that really actually helped Elizabeth, both the fact that she could read people, but also that she didn't have any connections. And in
Mhm.
order to be part of the Soviet underground, they recruited people. They looked for people who didn't have personal connections, because those personal connections can get you in trouble. And she does develop them. She did in real life, and over the course of the book, there's a romance, and there's some very close friendships that she makes. And sometimes those do become liabilities for her. So,
Ah. Now she stays loyal and to some people, and she betrays others very easily, and she chooses to join the Communist Party exactly for that reason, to make friends. And as she moves up and becomes a spy, and the stakes get harder, it sort of gets harder for her to know who she can actually trust. And she protects the people she trusts and loves most, and discards the others for her own end. And was there anyone she was wrong about, what in terms of betraying, or was she? You mentioned she told the truth, but was there anybody she sort of threw under the bus?
um, there were a few people in her testimony that she did throw under the bus. However, those people had already been exposed. So Elizabeth was pretty calculating in who she named, and there were some people that she specifically did not name. And I don't want to give any
Yes.
spoilers, but if she felt like she had to perform, that she had to give some names, and she was strategic about, well, I'm going to give these names, but they can't spy anymore anyways. And then there was one particular spy who almost becomes like her arch nemesis, and she testifies against him several times. And I think she ended up regretting it after the fact, just because things don't go well for him. And she realizes a little bit too late that he's become like the scapegoat, because
Yes.
he's the only one who didn't plead the fifth of all of her contacts. So
Yes.
I'm sure he was also kicking himself.
Okay. And I love symbolism in stories, like the red lipstick. And I know it during the war, Victory Red was sort of a symbol that women wore as both defiance and femininity. It was sort of beauty as duty. Now Elizabeth chooses to wear Victory Red lipstick as a sign of her. It's called something else, though, isn't it? In your book, and I can't remember what it is.
No,
It's sort of a sign of her defiance. And what other symbolic elements did you weave into the story to kind of create a um, I don't know, a few interesting little tidbits?
yeah, the Victory Red lipstick is almost like Elizabeth's war paint, because this is a time of war, and when men go into battle, they get, depending on what time period it is, armor, weapons, whatever the case may be. And it's actually one of her friends in the story who provides her with this red lipstick. And so when she's going to testify, when she's going into battle, when she's facing down the Russian version of today's KGB, the NKVD, she's got a red lipstick on. As far as other symbolism goes, fans of the Queen's Gambit, which is fabulous on Netflix if anybody's looking for something to binge. There's a little chess reference in there too, because Elizabeth was called the Red Spy Queen in the press, and she's got some moves that she makes. So we've got the Queen's Gambit in there as well, along with a chessboard. I got really interested in spy gadgets because, again, I will never be a spy, but the gadgets are so fun. So like chessboards that hide things, in addition to, not that she had like a phone shoe or anything, a shoe phone, I guess, anything like that, but there's lots of fun gadgetry and things too.
That's yeah, that's part of the most fun of being a writer, is that you may never be a spy, but you can sort of step into the skin of one and be one on paper, or a doctor on the Western Front for that matter. So that's perk of the career, I guess.
So since you mentioned that, I do kind of wonder, like, what drew you to World War One? I know, like, for the Cold War, I was interested in it because I felt like it hadn't really been tapped
Yep.
too much, and it's like intrigue and espionage. So, what was it about World War One that you were like, yes?
Well, it was my grandfather's war, and my grandfather was a British immigrant. And when the war began, he and his older brother signed up. And at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which is a famous Canadian battle, they were both there. My grandfather was well behind the lines with the artillery, and my great uncle was right at the front where he was killed. So he made me promise when I was about 15 that someday I would go over and find the war grave, which I did with my kids. And it was just so moving. And I thought, okay, I want to write a book about this. And I thought, well, I'm a woman. It has to be from a female perspective. And I figured, okay, that's a nurse. And then when I was doing the research, I discovered the fact that female doctors just simply weren't allowed. And I thought, oh, that's a much better story. We're gonna change that. So, but I mean, the research still allows it to fit logically into history. So she's not shoehorned in there and doesn't work. But yeah, it was. But that's basically what it was just family history.
And were you able to do a lot of travel? Like, I like to travel whenever I can for research, but also just because I like to travel. So if I'm able to blend the two together, that's like a win-win. So were you able to do a lot of travel? Like, what was your research?
Well, I did that bit of travel. We went to the battlefield in France, and I did a trip to visit my daughter when she was on exchange at university in Britain, and we went to the War Museum in London. But that was about it, I'm afraid. I did a lot of lecture series at the War Museum here in Calgary. But the nice thing about it was 2018 marked the centenary of the war. So there were an awful lot of retrospectives and diaries that came out, and all sorts of interesting things. So it was easy to find information on some aspects, especially personal stories. So that's, I don't get to travel as much as I would like to, but yes.
I think that writing stories set in the last century is not easy necessarily to research, but there are a lot more resources. And I feel like people have recognized, especially with the two world wars, that these family members, these people who, are the last people who fought in that war, like, oh, we need to get your recollections written down because that's important stuff. My first 4 books were set in the ancient world, and there was I don't really know, and there's no, like, Alexander the Great didn't really write about what he felt at this battle, so I'll just.
Yeah, but I mean, who's to dispute you at this point? I mean, my daughter's a historian, and she's like, no, it has to be accurate. She calls it, she says, don't Tudorize it, as in like the Tudor TV series with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as Henry VIII. Henry VIII looked like that. Wow, no wonder he was married 6 times.
I will say I watched that one, and it was lovely eye candy. So
yes.
gorgeous as well. Just
yeah.
There's a lot of fun stuff out there that's not necessarily super accurate. So a non question, oh, we might be close on time here, but I was going to ask if you have any like guilty pleasures as far as historical things go, like the Tudors that maybe aren't super accurate, but are just fun.
Oh, we're watching the Sharp movies again, the Bernard Cornwell series. And I mean, it's completely factually wrong. They didn't raise from the ranks or anything, but it is so wonderful. They're great stories. So, and Sean Bean lives. He doesn't die.
Sometimes it's fun just to indulge. I've had to train myself not to do the sitting next to my husband and daughter like, well, that's not accurate. Well, that's actually
Yes.
not how it went. It really went this way, because then I can't watch shows with them at all.
Pitfalls of living with a writer, though, right?
Right. I also have to hold back from like, I think this is going to happen next. And they're like, stop, you're thinking like that.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, so there's Julie.
Such great conversations. I mean, and you know what? That's what I love about both of your books is like the two time periods like you've talked about is they're not really covered in excess. And so these are both like little gems into both of those things. Because Stephanie, I'm with you. I'm intrigued by the Cold War and some of the spy stuff that was going on and some of the Russian. What was the Americans? I think
Yep.
that show. That was my guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one. And then Lecia, I mean, the World War I, it's like there's so much that we just don't. I don't know why, but we just don't know a lot about it. I don't know, you know, teaching wise, school, I don't know who to blame on that one.
Black and white war. Nobody wants to know about it.
It's a lot of World War I, because I feel like it is not a forgotten war. I feel like in Europe it gets more
Yes.
airtime.
And Canada.
America, yeah, we sat it out until 1917, and like it was hugely important. There's a reason it's called the Great War. So I really enjoyed reading The Woman at the Front, because
I loved Such a Clever Girl. So I'm so
So
thrilled.
couple quick questions that as I was listening. So you both have written a number of books over the years. And Lecia, I don't know why I thought earlier it's like, oh, you have a, you know, so it's like, no, you've been all around the world. I don't know what I was thinking when we were talking in the green room. That was like kind of one of those brain things. So pardon me on that. But to both of you, and Stephanie, I'll ask you first and then Lecia after. So did you finish this book during COVID, and was the writing experience different from not being in COVID?
Yes. This book landed on my editor's desk May 1st, 2020. So I was frantically trying to finish it when the world fell apart. And they called it Camelot came out the week in March that the world fell apart. So it was all just a hot mess. I was actually really glad that I wasn't trying to create a new story, because looking back at 2020, there's this idea I think that a lot of people had, like, if I could just sit home and write, if I could just sit home and do this, I would get so much done. No, when the world is burning, you are just glued to the news and like, oh my gosh, what's next? It's that meme with that little dog with the flames, and he's like, oh, this is fun. That was how I felt. So it was nice to have something that I was in the process of revising, because I felt like that was manageable. But please don't ask me to be creative, because there's nothing. It's just triage.
So did you start anything new though since the revisions of that? And but maybe after we were through that, I mean, we're still not through with the world burning, but we've kind of gotten used to it, I think, which is a sad thing.
We are the dog. Yes, we are the dog. It's fine. Yes. So because when a book hits the editor's desk, you know that you still have to do some revisions and so on. So I did pick those up, but while I was waiting for my revisions, I think November, I would have to check my files. I started something new, and I can't let the cat totally out of the bag, but it is a big shift time-wise. I liken historical fiction to being a time machine or a TARDIS if you're Doctor Who inclined. So I get to go visit the French Revolution and the Regency period for a mother-daughter story that I'm loving so much right now. It's done, it's being revised, so it can go to my editor's desk.
Love it. And that's the thing too, that I think November was about the time frame, because I don't know about you two, and Lecia, I'll get to that question to you in a second. But I couldn't read. I'm not a writer, but I couldn't even read for those first like 5 or 6 months. It was just like a vacuum. I mean, I just didn't, it was terrible. So I can imagine writing would be difficult. So Lecia, for you, was this book done before the world shut down, or were you working on it through that?
It was. I finished it in 2018, and
Okay.
so I was in revisions, and I was absolutely horrified. They told me that they were moving it back from March 2020 to September, or March 2021 to September. And I was thinking, oh, that's horrible. It's never going to come out. It's never going to come out. And then the world fell apart, and I thought, oh, thank God. But, I was working on another one, and I mean, it is almost impossible to write or read or function. I mean, all these people who have these things, I'm going to reorganize my closets, I'm going to renovate my house. I wonder how many of them managed to do that, because I couldn't even write a book. Yeah. And I had to ask for an extension on the second one. It was a darker story anyway, and yeah, it really messed with my mind. So
are you in the middle of that one now, or is that one turned in?
That one's turned in. I'm waiting for revision notes on it, but it's more suspenseful than I've ever written anything before. It takes place in Berlin in 1936 during the Olympics. So you've got Nazis and danger and awful things happening, and so that on top of the pandemic and stuff. And I understand completely about when you say you couldn't read a book. It's like I took to downloading samples and then just discarding them, not even being able to get that much read. So I'm just getting back into actually reading books, and for something other than research, just for pure enjoyment. So,
yeah, because the one thing that I thought was super interesting is that our customers were voraciously buying books, which was fantastic, because the online, but I was like, how are they reading them? Because they were buying, but I was like, I'm in the business and I cannot concentrate. So yeah, it was a really interesting time period, and I agree with you completely on, I mean, I didn't start walking, I didn't do anything. I mean, it was just like, but some people like started this whole new, like my house looks exactly like it did in March of 2020. My body
messier. Yeah. Oh no, mine's messier than it was, and that's probably not going to change. And there's 10 pounds more of me, and
Hey, yeah, I mean, I went the complete opposite. I think of what it was like you said, how did they do that? So speaking of, so you said you got back into reading, and I always like to ask, we were lifting up your 2 books today, but is there somebody that you want to lift up? Do you have one in mind? I'll start with Stephanie first. You got somebody in mind that of a book that you read recently that?
Oh, that's always such a hard question, because I usually have 4 or 5 books going at a time.
Yes.
Right. And it's usually the last one that I've read is my favorite.
We'll say, if anybody's out there looking for a book with all the feels, Stephen Rowley, who I met because he also wrote the editor about Jackie Kennedy, so I did an online event with him. I picked up The Guncle as an audiobook, and my family, we listened to it all summer on our various road trips. And there were parts where I was like blubbering, and then other parts where it was laugh out loud. And he actually narrates that one. So
does he? I didn't know he narrated the
does, and it is pitch perfect. So I highly recommend that one.
Yeah, I love it. And he is just a doll. I just love Stephen. He's a great promoter of other authors, and I just love that book too. So good.
And my husband, when he was listening, he was like, this would make a really great movie. And I've heard that it's been optioned for the screen, and it's like so I would
fingers. Yeah, because that's a whole other world and a whole other process that, oh dear God.
Totally.
Lecia, how about you? Anybody you want to lift up?
Well, I'm another person who reads 4 or 5 books at a time, but I'll mention one. I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it's about how it's sort of Indigenous stories that connect us back to nature and connect us to each other. And I've been finding it the most calming, soothing, wonderful book to read. I mean, it's just, you start reading it, it's just like, oh.
I love it when books do that.
Yes.
Love it
And
when books do that.
I've been looking for a book like that since this whole thing began. I love reading. I mean, eventually my TBR pile is going to fall on me, and that is how I am going to die. Sure.
What was the title of that one again?
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Braiding Sweetgrass. Okay.
By Robin Wall Kimmerer.
And then you mentioned the Sharp series. What streaming service is that on? Because I think I might have to go start watching that if it's got.
Somebody gave us a box set.
Okay.
Years ago, but it's one of those things that I'm not sure where it would be available, but it's probably available somewhere.
Yeah, I'll look it up. All right.
Definitely from a library.
Yeah, there you go. Well, ladies, it was wonderful hosting both of you. Stephanie, for everybody out there that wants to follow you, is there a social channel that you like better, or you want to take them to a website, or where do you want to send people?
My website is stephaniethorntonauthor.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram, so you can hunt me down in a variety of spots.
Love it. And how about you, Lecia?
You can find everything about me on my website at just LeciaCornwell.com. And yeah, I would love to hear from readers. And if you send me an email, I will reply. I promise. I don't get a lot of fan mail yet.
You will. You will. Well, ladies, until the next time, hopefully, if you're ever in the San, love the props. Thank you for doing that. Until hopefully when the after time comes, you can come to San Diego and join us in person. So
we would love to.
Excellent.
Our agent is there. We have the same agent, so we'll come and bring her.
Love that. Well, this has been a pleasure, and thank you for your time, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you so much for having us.
Take care.
Bye.